beer has changed quite a bit since the advent of the American craft beer revolution. Pale ale has been defined and redefined time and time again, evolving into the ever-popular IPA, all the way to current trends like hazies and milkshakes. But where did it all begin? Join me for a beer as we go back to basics with some of Indianapolis' first craft beer recipes today on Drinking with Beers. Before homebrewing became legal in 1978, the idea of what beer was, or what it could be, especially compared to the variety that we have today, was pretty limited. Beer had basically been reduced to a single, albeit popular beer style, the good old American lager. Beer was kind of just beer. Then homebrewing became legal and it opened the doors for discovery and experimentation. Old world recipes like England's pale ale were revived. Some of the first American craft brewers began brewing this simple style, which called for pale malts mixed with a dash of crystal malts. These crystal malts gave the beer a reddish hue and caramel flavor. The recipe also called for bitter hops. Some brewers stuck with the traditional English pale ale with earthy hop aromas, while others discovered the citrus and pine flavors of American hop varieties. And because pale ale is brewed with ale yeast, it offered more complexity and flavor than its counterpart, the lager. Slowly, palates changed and minds shifted around what beer could be, and there became this sort of symbiotic relationship between those changing palates and the ever-evolving pale ale. So pale ale was more of a general term, and it's actually kind of a funny story. At first, American consumers were confused by the name pale because when the pale ale poured out into their glass, it was actually more of a reddish color. And so to kind of help their customers out, some brewers changed the name from pale ale to red ale or amber ale. In 1994, pale ale and amber ale became their own categories at the Great American Beer Festival. And while there was some overlap between the two styles, the key delineation between pale and amber was that amber typically offered more caramel notes and a darker reddish hue. As time progressed, the American pale ale came into its own. People wanted more, and brewers were happy to experiment with American hop varieties. To showcase these varieties, brewers started adding even more hops to the pale ale, making a more intense version. And thus, the American IPA was born, a more heavily hopped and more bitter version of the pale ales of yore, inspired by the IPAs or the India pale ales of British India that were popular in the mid-1800s but had long fallen out of favor. It wasn't until 2002 did this new American IPA outpace the pale ale at the Great American Beer Festival. And as the IPA continued to gain popularity, there was sort of this race that broke out to see who could push hops to the limit. Just how many hops can we fit into a glass of beer? How hoppy can we make these IPAs? And so the double IPA was born, along with imperial IPAs and even triple IPAs, and we see the style continue to evolve with more modern versions like the hazy IPA and DDHs and milkshake IPAs, and there are countless variations. But today we're going back to basics. I've picked out two of Indianapolis' first craft beer recipes to share with you today. Now there's others still floating around there, but for the purposes of this video, I've chosen the PDG from Beer Brewery, which is a pale ale, and the Preacher's Daughter from Fountain Square Brewery, which is an amber ale. So if you've purchased these beers to drink along with me, go ahead, pour yourself a glass, and we'll get started. So this first beer is pretty damn good. No, really, that's the name. PDG stands for pretty damn good, or pretty darn good if you're offended. PDG is an American pale ale crafted and created by Darren Connor over at Beer Brewery. He was one of the first home brewers in Indianapolis to open a brewery, and did so in 2010, just a year after Sun King. And he developed this recipe before he ever opened the brewery when he was working at Great Fermentation's homebrew supply shop. And upon opening the brewery, they have since won too many awards to count, and they continue to grow and expand. And actually, Great Fermentations played a huge role in shaping Indy's craft beer scene. And if you were able to catch last week's video, I had the opportunity to interview Anita Johnson, who became the owner of Great Fermentations in 1995 and taught many of the home brewers how to brew who later went on to open breweries. She also had a hand in shaping legislation that favored home brewing, which really served as an incubator to really help grow and shape our craft beer community. So after this video, go ahead and check that video out. So the PDG is a classic American pale ale that uses pale malts and American hop varieties. So it balances more toward bitter, and really what those pale malts are doing is providing a platform for those citrusy hop characteristics to shine through. And it also prevents the beer from being too bitter, which makes it, while it is bitter and you do get some hop characteristics, it still makes it very refreshing and drinkable. Yep. Let me know what you think about this one. It's just a simple style that harkens back to those early days of craft beer. Sometimes I just like, nothing against IPAs of today, but sometimes I just really appreciate just a basic pale. Tastes like history in a glass. By the way, Great Fermentations makes a kit so you can make your own version of PDG at home. And if you end up trying this, let me know in the comments how it turns out. And please invite me over to drink some. Next in our evolutionary journey is the Preacher's Daughter Amber Ale from Fountain Square Brewery. This is also one of the OGs of Indy's beer scene. Fountain Square opened the same year as beer in 2010. And Preacher's Daughter was one of their first recipes that they obviously still carry to this day. So Preacher's Daughter is an American amber ale brewed with citrusy American hops, some caramel malts, and some biscuit malts. So amber ale, when you compare it to the pale ale, the obvious difference is that the amber is slightly darker and more reddish in color than the pale. And then when you drink it, you'll notice it has a similar flavor profile as far as the American citrus hop characteristics, but then the key difference is that the amber ale has a little bit more of those caramel malt flavors. Amber, or the Preacher's Daughter, is slightly sweeter than the pale ale and a little bit nutty. So I'm a classics girl, and one of the things I really love about Fountain Square Brewery is that they have continued to brew the beer that they have brewed since the beginning in 2010. Now they do some seasonals and experimental styles, but for the most part they've always carried those classic American styles that they've brewed since the beginning. Beer like, Preacher's Daughter Amber Ale, Working Man's Pilsner, Backyard Porter, Hop for Teacher Pale Ale, and Soul Ride IPA. They still brew these originals because people still drink them, because it's solid beer. Okay, it's not solid, it's technically liquid, but you get what I'm trying to say. So I hope these two examples of the PDG Pale Ale and the Preacher's Daughter Amber Ale gave you a better understanding of some of those early craft beer pale ale recipes and a fun little dive into some of Indy's brewing history. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a like and let me know in the comments what you thought about the beer. And for more Indy beer and brewing highlights, don't forget to subscribe. I'm Amy Beers, and until we drink again, cheers!